They shouldn't exist. Not in their time, not with their technology, and not with the knowledge the world supposedly had. Yet, hidden in museums, monasteries, and royal archives are ancient maps showing coastlines no European ship had ever reached, rivers no explorer had ever recorded, and continents that weren't even officially discovered. These mysterious maps suggest something we're not supposed to consider, that ancient civilizations may have known the world long before we ever gave them credit. Some maps depict Africa with astonishing accuracy, centuries before Europeans circumnavigated the continent. Some show the Americas' shape with a precision historians can't fully explain. And then there is the most controversial of them all. The map some people once believed showed Antarctica before it was covered in ice. Scholars dismiss that theory today, yet the mystery refuses to die, because even the debunking doesn't answer a more important question. Where did these cartographers get their information? Long before GPS satellites painted digital outlines of coastlines, and centuries before explorers like Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Magellan reshaped our understanding of geography, ancient mapmakers were trying to capture Earth on parchment, cloth, or stone. Many of their works were crude, distorted, or incomplete, reflecting the limited reach of their cultures. Yet scattered among these primitive attempts are anomalies, maps that show impossible knowledge, uncanny accuracy, or geographic features no one of their era should have known. These ancient cartographic mysteries do not exist to prove fringe theories. They exist to show how knowledge moves across cultures in ways we rarely acknowledge. Empires rise and fall. Libraries burn. Scholars translate books from languages that no longer exist. Knowledge travels quietly, sometimes surviving only through fragments. Ancient maps are not drawings, they are memories. Memories of journeys, encounters, and exchanges that may have happened far earlier than our textbooks suggest. The deeper question isn't whether ancient people traveled far, many did. The question is, how much of that knowledge survived? And how, centuries later, did it end up preserved on maps whose accuracy should have been impossible? The Piri Reis Map is one of the most fascinating artifacts in human history. Created in 1513 by Ottoman admiral and scholar Piri Reis, it was drawn on gazelle skin parchment. Only 1/3 of it survives today, preserved in Istanbul's Topkapı Palace. The surviving fragment shows parts of the western coast of Africa, the eastern coastline of South America, and several Atlantic islands. At first glance, it looks like a typical early Renaissance world map, but Piri left handwritten notes explaining exactly where his information came from. Those notes changed everything. According to Piri Reis, he compiled the map using at least 20 source maps. Some came from Portuguese explorers who had charted the African coast. Some came from older Islamic maps inherited from scholars of the Abbasid Golden Age. A few came from ancient Greek and possibly earlier Mediterranean sources. And astonishingly, one of the maps he used was drawn by Christopher Columbus. That map is now lost, but scholars know it once existed. This means the Piri Reis Map is one of the oldest surviving documents incorporating Columbus's original geographic data. Portions of the South American coastline appear with accuracy unusual for its time. Some curves are correct, where even later European maps showed distortions. How did Piri have such information when the Portuguese were still exploring those same coasts? Some scholars argue it reflects sophisticated but scattered early 16th century nautical knowledge, but others believe Piri inherited maps that were themselves based on much older charts, perhaps from civilizations whose maritime achievements were not fully recorded. This does not imply lost continents or aliens. It suggests we underestimate ancient navigators. A major 20th century controversy once claimed the Piri Reis Map showed Antarctica without ice, implying ancient civilizations charted it thousands of years ago. Scholars have thoroughly debunked this. The Antarctica portion is simply a distorted continuation of South America, a common cartographic error. Yet even after debunking, the true mystery remains. Where did Piri's source maps originally come from? How old were they really? And what earlier knowledge did they preserve? Decades before Piri Reis drew his map, the Venetian monk Fra Mauro created one of the most remarkable maps of the medieval world. Completed in the 1,450 seconds, the Fra Mauro Map is nearly 2 meters in diameter and astonishingly detailed. Unlike many medieval maps, it does not follow religious symbolism. It is empirical, observational, and filled with notes referencing real voyages. Its most shocking detail is its depiction of the Indian Ocean. For centuries, Europeans believed the Indian Ocean was enclosed by land. Ancient Greek texts, biblical interpretations, and medieval scholars reinforced this belief. Yet Fra Mauro boldly rejected it, showing the Indian Ocean open to the Atlantic, a fact Europeans wouldn't confirm until Vasco da Gama reached India by sea. How did Fra Mauro know this? He recorded stories from Arab traders, African sailors, and Venetian merchants who brought eyewitness accounts. He even wrote about a specific voyage, where a ship from the Great Kingdom of the East, interpreted as Chinese, sailed from the Indian Ocean around Africa into the Atlantic. This voyage predates European exploration of that route by nearly a century. Fra Mauro's map shows how much knowledge flowed between cultures long before the age of exploration. In East Asia, another astonishing map was created decades earlier. In 1402, Korean scholars produced the Kangnido Map, one of the oldest surviving world maps from the region. The map exaggerates China, Korea, and Japan in size, reflecting their cultural importance. But the shock lies in its representation of Africa. Africa appears with a surprisingly accurate outline. Even the southern tip is drawn with close to correct proportions. The challenge for historians is simple. Neither China nor Korea had explored southern Africa by that time, and Europeans wouldn't round the Cape of Good Hope until 1488. So how did Korean cartographers know the shape of Africa? The answer lies in centuries of knowledge exchange along Islamic trade routes. Muslim geographers, stretching back to al-Idrisi in the 1100s, and earlier scholars of the Abbasid era, had compiled remarkably accurate maps of Africa, India, and the Middle East. This knowledge filtered eastward through merchants, diplomats, and scholars. The Kangnido Map is evidence of a global exchange of geographic knowledge long before Europeans charted these regions. Another masterpiece of ancient cartography, the Ming Hunyi Tu, created in 1389 during the early Ming dynasty, shows the entire Eurasian continent stretching from Europe to Japan and down through India and parts of Africa. Drawn on silk with sweeping brushstrokes, it presents a vision of the world rarely acknowledged in Western history. While distorted in parts, its scope is enormous. It demonstrates that the Ming dynasty possessed extensive records of foreign lands from centuries of diplomacy and trade. Knowledge flowed along the Silk Road, through ambassadors, traders, and scholars whose names were never recorded. The map is not impossible. It is the product of a world connected by intellectual networks, long before global imperialism. Europe had its own cartographic wonders that complicate the narrative of discovery. One of the most significant is the Tabula Rogeriana, created in 1154 by the Muslim geographer al-Idrisi for King Roger II of Sicily. At a time when Europeans struggled with symbolic maps, Idrisi charted the known world with south at the top and astonishing detail. He integrated information from African merchants, Norse travelers, Mediterranean sailors, and Islamic scholars. For nearly 3 centuries, it was considered the most accurate map in the world. Meanwhile, maps like the Hereford and Ebstorf Mappa Mundi blended theology and geography, showing how Europeans conceptualized the world even when they lacked accurate data. Yet even these maps contain surprising details, hints of regions far beyond Europe, proving that stories of distant lands reached medieval Europe long before formal exploration. Taken together, these maps show something astonishing. Humanity was interconnected long before modern globalization. Ancient trade routes carried spices and silk, but they also carried stories, coastlines, and directions. Sailors shared knowledge in ports far from home. Scholars in Baghdad copied Greek texts, added new information from India and East Africa, and passed their works westward into Europe. Chinese envoys sailed to East Africa. Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean, guided only by the stars, waves, and birds. African traders crossed to Arabia. Maps are the fossil record of this exchange. The real mystery is not whether ancient people traveled, they certainly did. The mystery is how that knowledge survived, often in fragments, and reappeared centuries later in maps drawn by people who never saw the places they depicted. Knowledge jumps cultures. It survives wars, collapses, translations, and migrations. When Piri Reis claimed he used maps from the time of Alexander the Great, he may have been exaggerating, or he may have referred to Greek maps copied through centuries of Islamic scholarship. Every ancient map carries the fingerprints of forgotten mapmakers. Phoenician sailors who drew Mediterranean routes on papyrus, Arab navigators who charted monsoon winds, Chinese cartographers who recorded Southeast Asian archipelagos, African mariners who crossed the Red Sea, and Polynesian explorers who mapped the Pacific with their minds. Their work rarely survived because they used perishable materials, palm leaves, bark, bamboo, cloth, but traces of their knowledge migrated across continents. When Fra Mauro or Piri Reis created their maps, they weren't inventing new worlds, they were inheriting old ones. And so we return to the maps that shouldn't exist but do. The Piri Reis Map, Fra Mauro's masterpiece, Kangnido, the Ming Hunyi Tu, the Tabula Rogeriana. All these maps challenge the idea that ancient people knew little of the wider world. They show that long before the age of exploration, humanity had already explored, connected, traded, and mapped far more than we were taught. These maps are not evidence of aliens or mythical lost continents. They are evidence of something far more human and far more extraordinary, that curiosity, travel, and knowledge exchange have always been part of our species. The maps survive only as fragments, but they hint at a world much older, much more connected, and much more sophisticated than we imagine. They prove that even when history forgets people, their knowledge can survive, preserved on parchment, woven into silk, passed through scholars, carried across oceans, and rediscovered centuries later. That is the true mystery these ancient maps reveal. Not what was lost, but how much was known.